Chapter 7. Dax was now trapped to Hyde's table, still unconscious, but not for much longer. Smelling salts were a wonderful thing, and there just happened to be some in the inventory. First, I needed to finish preparing. Well, it wasn't so much me as it was Hyde. I was just along for the ride, but I could feel every moment, every movement and every emotion like they were my own. I reached into the armoire and pulled out a white lab coat and a black rubber apron, slipping them both on as to avoid blood splatter. I put my hair up into a ponytail to keep it out of my eyes. Strangely enough, I always blocked out once the deed was done, but I normally woke up on the floor covered in blood. Each and every time I had to shower as soon as I woke up, and then would have to pour bleach on the floor to get rid of any evidence. If only Hyde could take care of that herself. I turned to look at my arsenal of tools for the job, housed inside of the wooden structure, and sighed, crossing my arms over my chest and thinking of that special treatment I wanted to use this time. I'd fashioned the inside to contain not only shelves, but hooks and clamps to hold things of different shapes and sizes, ranging from a small ice pick to a handsaw and anything in between. I stood there for a moment, taking the time to think about each tool in their entirety and what kind of pain I would want to inflict. These were the times I hated being inside of my own mind. Images of death and blood would flash through in a split-second interval like photographs, sometimes even making my body shiver involuntarily. In the blink of an eye, the decision was made. My hands reached out for the reciprocating saw. Next, Hyde chose a straight razor, the ones that barbers used when shaving men's beards at their shops. I watched as I turned away from the armoire, contentment seeping through my muscles. She had only chosen 2 weapons this time, which was highly unusual. Now it was time to wake him. The smelling salts were just across the room on the table that had been painted black to hide any blood that I may have missed when cleaning up after Hyde. That had never once happened, but there was a first time for everything. The green and white box was practically calling out to her, and I felt my own feet begin to move across the hard tiled floor, still in the same heels I'd been wearing earlier in the night. I was still mildly surprised that they'd managed to stay on at all while I was sleeping. The click on the floor was beginning to sound like it would murder my senses, and if I could have, I would have covered my ears with my hands to stop the sound. Unfortunately, I would have to listen to it for as long as Hyde felt it necessary to wear them. I took a small paper cylinder into my manicured hand and turned back the sleeping man onto my table. He was out cold, and this would be the only way to wake him. I'd never killed them while they were still unconscious. There was just something about hearing them scream and looking into their teary wide eyes as she cut into them that gave her pleasure. A thrill ran through her that even I could feel, and it resonated through our shamed body from head to toe. Placing a small ammonia pellet under his nose, I snapped it open, the sound echoing through the air as he woke up startled. He shook his head like he was trying to shake the smell away. Once he realised he was strapped down, he jerked, trying to wriggle his hands free of the restraints. "There's no use in that, Dax." My voice sounded different, even to me. Hyde instilled this growling quality to it that you couldn't miss, almost like multiple voices sprouted from within my vocal cords. His head jerked toward me, and his eyes took in my appearance. Fear spread throughout his face, reaching his eyes, causing his muscles to tense beneath his glistening skin and fists clenching and unclenching. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice raised an octave. The fact that it was because he was afraid made Hyde smile. I felt my lips spread into a wide, creepy grin that I wanted to wipe away as soon as it appeared. "A special place," I breathed. I leaned over to him and took the straight razor into my hand. No work could begin until my hands were covered in purple nitrile, and Hyde was getting jittery, shaking with anticipation, which caused me to grip the handle even harder. Turning back to the table, I took 2 gloves out of the box and slipped my hands into them, flexing my right hand in the glove as I turned around and picked up the razor once more. My special place. No worries though, as I hope you know you won't be walking out of here. I closed the razor. It was a scare tactic, but not the first course of action in this case. His eyes never strayed from me as I walked back around the table, watching each movement and taking in every detail as I moved. I could tell that he knew I wasn't the same person anymore. It was my body, but not me. It was an expression that I had seen multiple times before, and I was sure it wouldn't be the last. That and the fear. Hyde thrived on the horror. The terror that penetrated the air in that moment was profound, and I could feel Hyde's need to stroke the air, just to see her fingers ripple through it. The closest object to her that she would rake her fingers through was right in front of her. Dax still watched my actions as I moved around the table, his chest rising and falling with increasing frequency. He wasn't sure what to think. From what he knew, I liked him enough to sleep with him. And now, I was going to kill him. I was a black widow, and he was the fly caught in my web. This really wasn't the case. If anything, I had truly hoped that Hyde wouldn't show her face at all, but I wasn't that lucky. At least, she had let me get something out of it before she started slashing. The thought was crass, but true. Once I got up to the reciprocating saw, I felt my fingers graze it, but not pick it up. It wasn't time just yet. Wouldn't be for a little while longer. Hyde's torture sessions could take hours, and it was a wonder I got any sleep at all. Somehow these kills left me with a renewed energy that could leave me going for days, especially once I had the meal of human heart. There was just something about it that made it easier to keep going the way I was forced to compete with Hyde living alongside within my body residence. There were 2 people trying to occupy one space, and it sure was getting crowded. What Dax said next caused me to freeze in place. "Why are you doing this, Blythe?" he asked, this question in earnest. When I looked him in the eyes, I saw the truth was something he wanted. Even if he didn't make it out of this room with a pulse. He also hadn't seemed to notice the change in my eye colour yet. A small tremor worked through my entire body. This was a question she liked to hear. For some reason it delighted her, and struck loathing into me, making me want to fight against her to stop the madness. My body glided toward him again, and once I was next to his chest, I leaned down to him so he could notice the green hue of my eyes, instead of the chocolate brown they had been before. I made certain I had his full eye contact. His eyes widened. "I'll let you in on a little secret." She paused, letting the words stop at the base of my throat. She was going to revel in this moment, where the terror in his face would be even stronger once the next few words were uttered aloud. She placed my hand on his chest and dug my nails into his skin just enough to leave small half moons in their place. My eyes fluttered back up to his, and she hissed, "I'm not blithe." She reacted just the way she had hoped. His eyes widened even more, showing whites all the way around his beautiful blue orbs. I felt sorry for him, but Hyde was happy as a clam. That was when he whispered, Oh my god, what the fuck?" He observed the only change that took place in me beside the personality and strength. She took that moment to dig my nails in even further to his perfect flesh and drag them across his chest, leaving deep, bloody trails across his skin that looked like he had been slashed by a werewolf. His screams echoed throughout the room. Thank goodness for studio standard soundproofing. It was something I'd quietly done when I commissioned the room to be built. They weren't on the floor plans, just like I wanted. Hyde growled outwardly, but I screamed on the inside. It was a constant battle of wills, and I tried my best to pull her back without succeeding. Hyde quietly took in the perfect trimmed fingernails covered in blood and flesh poking through the nitrile gloves, and she smirked. Walking back down to the end of the table, I put on new gloves just before I picked up the saw and turned it on. The sound was menacing and sent a chill through me that I was sure I would feel for days. If I thought I had nightmares about her kills before, I sure would now. No doubt about it. Which appendage should I start with? This was a rhetorical question, of course. Dax was still in a state of shock, recovering as the pain from the initial strikes eased off to be replaced by the burning pain of exposure. His eyes never once wavered from the blade, though. She placed it just above the skin of his left ankle and said, "Eeny," then to the right. "Meeny." Then she placed it right above his left knee. "Minny," deciding finally on his left foot. After all, she placed the blade above his left ankle and moaned, "Mo." Pushing it against the skin, he cried out as the blade sliced into his skin. The skin and muscle were the easiest parts to get through, and when I hit bone, I had to put some real effort into it. Within seconds, the blade began to grind against his ankle bone, moving it back and forth. I'd found the space right in between the joint and pushed even harder until there was a loud pop. Even more shrieks erupted from her victim. If I could have looked away, I would have. Most of the others I didn't mind, but Lex was a different story. I had truly liked him, and she had felt the need to take that away from me. After she was finished with his foot, she moved to his knee. This was harder to work through, but it got easier once you realised you needed to begin below the kneecap and then push up below it to the knee joint underneath. I was startled as each joint made that popping sound as the blade serrated the attaching tendons, making me want to put my hands over my ears again. Hyde had control, so this was an impossibility. She made her gory progression from foot all the way up to the hip, and then started on the other leg in the same fashion. At this point, he was unconscious as his extreme loss of blood pooled on the table. It began to splatter in large drips and rivers onto the floor around my feet, absolutely ruining my shoes. Then the arms were next. I tried to ignore it all, but then the blood splattered onto the coat and my face, leaving it coated in a warm, thick film. She didn't seem to mind it at all. If anything, she wanted to rub it into my skin. but I could feel her resting the impulse to do so. Instead, she used the sleeve of the lab coat to wipe it from our eyes and keep going. After this was over, I knew I was going to be sick. Once the dismemberment was complete, she looked directly into his face. It was slack and drenched in his own blood, mouth barely parted and his brow furrowed like it had frozen that way from the pain. A pang of regret emerged from within Hyde, which was a shock in of itself, but it quickly vanished. Now, that's just too bad. Blythe, you really picked her look at this time. She used one gloved hand to pat his cheek, leaving his blood in the shape of her fingers there, and then stood, placing the blade against his solar plexus, cutting through the bone easily enough to reach the heart below. Once exposed, she dug my hands into the crevice where she had removed the heart. It was slippery and hot within my grasp as I felt my arms raise it to just eye level, staring at it intently, like it was the only thing that existed. "That's going to be some good eating," she announced, letting the words slither out of my mouth and into the bloody air around us. The walls were covered in the stuff, as well as the floor, coat, the apron. Hyde's gaze didn't falter from the heart she'd held in her hand, buzzing with anxious energy and anticipation. The heart was all that mattered.